right, it appears we are live. Good morning, everyone. My name is Greg Cox, and I'm going to be introducing several of our speakers this morning and this afternoon. But this morning, I'm really excited to have Dr. Sabrina Paganoni back with us. She's come back to visit us again in the Northern New England chapter. She's the co-director of the Neurological Research Institute at Massachusetts General Hospital, and she's an assistant professor at Harvard Medical School. Her research focuses on clinical trials and therapy development for ALS. She served as the PI of several ALS clinical trials and has been using novel trial designs, endpoints, and digital technology tools to innovate the way investigational products are tested in ALS. She's co-PI of the Healy ALS platform trial, which we can't wait to hear more about. This is the first platform trial for ALS in the world. She's recently reported the positive results of the CENTAUR trial and is the co-chair of the upcoming Phoenix trial. Love the names of these trials. I'm not sure who quite put them together. Her research has been funded by NIH, nonprofits, and industry. She's published more than 100 different peer-reviewed manuscripts, and she's received several awards for her work, including the 2021 Top 10 Clinical Research Achievement Award for the CENTAUR trial. So I can't wait to hear more about it, and welcome, Dr. Paganoni.
Thank you so much. And really, I remember the last time I was present in person for your chapters meeting, and happy to connect virtually today, but certainly can't wait to be back in person. Today, we will talk about a couple of trials, specifically the CENTAUR and Phoenix trials, which are part of the AMX35 or Amylyx clinical development program. And I'll speak about the Healy ALS platform trial. Both trials or development programs are very exciting, and I want to summarize what we know so far, and especially I want to provide you with news, what's new, why it matters, and how you can get involved with these development programs. So let me start with the first topic. So I'll spend about 10-15 minutes on AMX35 and then 10-15 minutes on the Healy ALS platform trial. Obviously, I would love to take as many questions as possible after the presentation. So AMX35 is a combination of the compounds PB and TURSO. These are acronyms. PB stands for sodium phenyl butyrate. TURSO, I must admit, it's too complicated of a name, so I'll just use TURSO. They are two compounds that act on different parts of the cell, different components of the motor neurons. Specifically, TURSO reduces mitochondrial dysfunction, and we know that the mitochondria are such important organelles in every cell, and they are really the powerhouse of the cell. So they're really important, and TURSO it was shown to help protect them. PB, or phenylbutyrate, reduces ER stress. The ER, in this case, is actually a cellular organelle, and it's a component of the cell that does many functions. One of them is to help remove toxic proteins or proteins that accumulate in a way that's not functional and deposits in the cell, causing cell damage. And so it's important to keep this clearance mechanism active. So just to give everyone a broad overview of what a typical clinical development program looks like, I just want to provide this summary. Most of you are probably familiar with this, but I just want to make sure that we all have the same understanding, because that's key to understanding what I'm going to discuss in terms of AMX35. So typically, when a company or an investigator starts a drug development program, there's going to be multiple clinical trials, and each clinical trial is named according to its phase. Phase 1, 2, 3, and then there is a phase 4. Now, the goals of each phase can be very different, and that has an impact on the trial design and the size of the trial. So in a phase 1 study, typically these are very small programs, and they're designed to test the safety of a new drug. A typical phase 2 program can test many things. It's sort of an intermediate size trial, so we're talking of a few hundred participants, and phase 2 trials generally test the drug's safety, dosing, meaning what's the best dose, biomarkers, meaning some markers, some signals of activity, biological activity, as well as some signals of clinical efficacy. So as you can see, phase 2 studies have multiple goals, and depending on the specific design of a specific phase 2 study, the study could be targeted more towards safety or more towards efficacy. In other words, phase 2 studies can be very different depending on the specific design. So they're not all equal. So we need to make sure we understand specifically a phase 2 trial, the characteristics of each individual phase 2 trial. Now, phase 3 trials are universally large because they are considered basically the last trial before FDA review. So in other words, phase 3 trials are meant to test the efficacy of the drug and give the provide the ultimate knowledge about the efficacy of the drug in that population. They also acquire additional safety data. And because they are so pivotal, they are generally larger, a few hundred participants to a few thousand participants, depending on the disease. If all of these trials are positive, then typically the company will submit the data to the FDA, which is the governmental agency that reviews drug applications in the US. And then if the review is positive, then the drug can be approved. And typically there's going to be a post-approval surveillance study, also known as a phase 4 study, where essentially one will test will continue to test the effects of the drug in the real world. So once it's given to thousands, if not millions of people, depending on the disease area. Again, this is a very basic overview. Just wanted to make sure that we all have the same information as we discuss the specific programs that I'm going to talk about soon. So let's talk about the AMX35 clinical development program. I told you briefly what AMX35 is. That's manufactured by a company called Amylyx Pharmaceuticals, which is located in Massachusetts. There was no need for a phase 1 study, I should say, because the individual components of the drug were already known and known to be reasonably safe. And so we could proceed right away with what's known as CENTAUR, which was the first trial of AMX35, or the actual combination of the two compounds. There was a phase 2 study. It included 137 participants, and that was completed recently. So essentially, that's the main trial that has results right now, and I want to describe the results shortly. Again, it was a phase 2 trial, but it was a very complete and really well-designed and well-managed trial that provided a lot of information, and we'll review what information it provided. Now, the company has recently announced that there's going to be a follow-up study, a phase 3 trial that will supplement the clinical development program of AMX35. This is going to be a global study. So CENTAUR was only open in the US, and Phoenix will be open in the US and in Europe. It's starting soon, really any day now. It's a phase 3 study, and it's larger. Not surprisingly, for a phase 3 study, it will include about 600 participants. Well, you asked a great question about the names of the trials. So the CENTAUR trial, the name actually, when we started the trial in 2016, we asked investigators, sites, coordinators to suggest names for the program. And CENTAUR is an acronym that stands for a combination, et cetera, et cetera. That's, I remember the first letter, but basically it's a complicated acronym from the full name of the trial. So every trial has a full name, which is a few lines long. And so CENTAUR is an acronym for short to remember the name of the trial. We actually asked study staff to vote, and we had 5 or 6 options that were submitted by people working on the trial, and CENTAUR was the one that resonated the most. Because I think it also gives the sense of sort of determination, and also, if you remember from Greek mythology, centaurs were a combination of 2 creatures, man and horse, and the AMX35 drug is a combination of 2 drugs. So that kind of idea also resonated, and then we decided to continue with the Greek mythology theme, and that's why Phoenix was chosen for the next phase. Now, the CENTAUR trial was a fantastic collaboration in the ALS community. The trial enrolled at 25 centers of the NILS consortium in the US. The centers are located as per the map. It also included many centers in the New England area, so we're very thankful for that. And the NILS, or Northeast ALS Consortium, is a consortium of ALS sites and centers that do ALS research around the country, and also a few international sites. And it started in the Northeast, so it definitely has New England roots, but then it expanded to the entire US, and so that's why we have sites, all over the country. And in fact, the CENTAUR trial also enrolled on the West Coast and in other states in the Midwest, etc., and the South, as you can see on the map. We designed the trial in collaboration with Amylyx Pharmaceuticals. We had a lot of great input from the patient community, so we are absolutely thankful for that. We really wanted to design a trial that was patient-centered, and we got fantastic feedback and input from the ALS community during the design of the trial and during the execution of the trial. The trial was coordinated from our hospital, the Massachusetts General Hospital, specifically the Healy Center for ALS at Mass General, in collaboration with the Barrow Neurological Institute. And the funding for the initial start of the trial was provided by the ALS Association and ALS Finding a Cure. They funded the beginning of the trial, so without their help, this trial would have never happened. And then Amylyx Pharmaceuticals, provided the rest of the funding. And now, obviously, it's really great that we could collaborate with the entire ALS community, academia, researchers, patients, and foundations, nonprofits. And now, obviously, the company is taking the trial, the development program, to the next stage, which is great. Let me talk about the CENTAUR participants. Obviously, this study would have not been able to be performed without the generous contribution of 137 people with ALS who enrolled in the study. Their average age was 57 at the time that they enrolled. They were about 1 year after their symptom onset. About a quarter of participants had bulbar onset, which means that their first symptoms were in the bulbar region, which means difficulty with speech or swallowing. And the majority of the participants had the first symptoms either in the arms or the legs. The majority of participants were taking riluzole, edaravone, or both when they entered the study. And this is because we allowed people to take standard of care medications, which in the US means riluzole and or edaravone. And so the results of AMX35 are on top of standard of care. In other words, when we say placebo, we really mean, we are comparing the drug to the standard of care, not to no medication. And so that's important because we want to provide added value on top of riluzole and edaravone so that people with ALS can take a combination of medications to get the best benefit. So the CENTAUR trial evaluated the following objectives. We tested the effect of AMX35 on physical function that was measured over a 6-month period. We also tested the effect of AMX35 on survival, assessed long-term up to 3 years. We also wanted to confirm that AMX35 was safe and well tolerated. So the trial results have been published in papers, in 2 papers in 2020. I'm listing them on the slide. I do want to mention that while I will briefly summarize the results today, I've also provided several webinars, I believe 6 or 7, that are recorded on the NILS website. I have the link on the slide. So if you go to the NILS website and you look under educational webinars, there is a specific section. And again, I gave several webinars on this topic in the past, including a few recent ones. So if you want to learn about the details of these studies, please refer to those webinars. And also I want to mention that for those of you who want to look at the technical aspects of this research, the 2 papers where we describe the safety, effect on physical function, and effect on survival are available open access. That means that if you go on the website of the journals, the New England Journal of Medicine and Muscle and Nerve, respectively, you can search by my name, or if you can look at CENTAUR or other keywords under ALS, you can find the full text of the papers, and you can feel free to share them with your physician or care team. Let me talk about the study design. So we enrolled 137 people with ALS. They were randomized or randomly assigned to either active or placebo in a 2-to-1 fashion. So what that means is that the group that received active was about twice as big as the group who received placebo. The randomized placebo-controlled period of the trial lasted 24 weeks, which is essentially 6 months. And during this period, some people took the active drug and some people took placebo. And we compared their functional status by measuring what we define as the primary efficacy endpoint, which is known as the ALS FRSR. The ALS FRSR is the most widely scale that's used in clinical trials to evaluate the effect of drugs in people living with ALS. It's a functional rating scale. So what that means is that we measure function on 12 activities of daily living, such as ability to speak, ability to swallow, ability to walk, ability to use hands to write or feed themselves, oneself. So basically, we measure activities that are common and obviously important for everyone. So that's how we measure the effect of the drug on physical function. After the completion of the 6 months of placebo-controlled period of the trial, people who completed the trial were given the option to receive active drug long-term for up to about 3 years. So what that means is that everyone who completed the trial was given access to AMX35, the active drug long-term, regardless of whether they had been on AMX35 or placebo before. I'm going to summarize the results. So first here, I'm summarizing the results of the placebo-controlled period of the trial, where we measure the effect of the drug on function as measured by the ALS-FRSR. As you can see on the slide, there was a difference of 2.32 points at the end of the 6-month study. So what that means is that the people who received active drug had total scores on this scale that were 2.32 points higher than people who were on placebo. And that means better function. So this means that basically the people who received active as opposed to placebo retained function longer than people who received placebo. Then, as I said earlier, everyone was given the option to receive active drug long-term. And so we went back 3 years later to measure the survival of people who started on the drug and people who started on placebo. And the people who started on the drug lived on average, based on this pre-specified analysis, on average 6.5 months longer than the group that started on placebo. That corresponds to a 44% lower risk of death in the group that started on active drug compared to placebo. And throughout all of this, the drug was found to be safe. There were a few people, a minority of people, that had some gastrointestinal events, including diarrhea, nausea, and abdominal discomfort. So what's new? Some of you may have been familiar with everything I've said so far. So what's new and why that matters? Well, in the United States, Amylyx, the company, announced last month that the intention to submit a new drug application to the FDA based on CENTAUR data. So what this means is that the data that was collected as part of CENTAUR will be submitted to the FDA for the purposes of asking the FDA if they can approve the drug in the United States. And I'm sorry, there is a typo on the slide. It was not last week, it was last month. So in any case, the Amylyx announced that there was a public announcement. So if you Google it, if you look online, you can see the full press release. That's a screenshot from the press release from September 15th, 2021. Again, Amylyx announced the intention to submit a new drug application to the FDA for AMX35 for the treatment of ALS based on data from CENTAUR. And the decision is made on recent discussions that the company had with the FDA. Specifically in July, they had what's known as a pre-NDA meeting, because as you may remember, if you've been following the news, before that meeting, it was thought that this submission would not be possible. Instead, after that meeting, there was new data, new discussions, and that discussion determined the next steps, meaning that Amylyx can now submit the new drug application. So what's the current information on timelines? Because obviously I'm sure that everyone is interested in learning more about sort of the timelines and implications of this announcement. So what's known is that Amylyx intends to submit a new drug application to the FDA. We don't know the exact date of the submission. I know that the team is working really hard on preparing the submission, and I expect there will be a public announcement as soon as the submission goes through, meaning it is sent to the FDA. However, please know that even if a company submits data to the FDA, that doesn't mean that the submission will be accepted or will be reviewed in a favorable way. So it's possible that that might take time, and we don't know ultimately if the FDA will approve AMX 35. So again, what we know is that there will be a submission. What we don't know is the outcome of that submission. I also want to mention that Amylyx donated a lot of the clinical trial data and participant samples from CENTAUR to help advance science in ALS for future treatments and discoveries. This is incredibly important. I do want to emphasize this, and we obviously encourage all companies to do the same. We do have in the academic community, we do have some shared resources, such as, for example, the PROACT database, which is a clinical trial data database, and we have the NILS biorepository, which is a biorepository of samples, for example, DNA, plasma, serum, urine, CSF, etc. All of these resources, I do want to emphasize that they are freely available to researchers worldwide, and they depend on donations from investigators and companies that decide to share the data. So Amylyx made the decision to donate data and samples, which is fantastic. These shared resources are supported by multiple groups, multiple academic groups and nonprofits, including the ALS Association, and the names of the other groups are on the slide. And really, these are amazing shared resources, because we can learn so much from previous studies, and we can continue to amplify the impact of previous studies by sharing data freely. So I really wanted to emphasize that and thank the company for this donation. So the goal is to get AMX 35 to all people with ALS worldwide. And it's because of that goal that the Phoenix phase 3 clinical trial is about to start. So the study is moving forward to supplement the clinical development program of AMX 35. And this study will happen both in the US and in Europe. It is a larger study, so I just want to compare head-to-head CENTAUR to Phoenix. So Phoenix, which is about to start, will be a larger study and a longer study. So it will include 600 participants who will be studied for 48 weeks. It will have broader eligibility. So what this means is that we're going from a smaller population to a broader population that can be included, more people can be included, and we will measure a more comprehensive set of outcome measures. Obviously, we will measure the same kind of functional and survival data and respiratory functional data, but we also want to learn more about the impact of the drug on the entire experience of ALS, including time to key events. For example, the impact of the drug on hospitalization, feeding tube, BiPAP, quality of life, ALS stages, and also the impact on caregiver well-being. So all of this is to say that while the NDA submission is in process, it's also important to continue to learn about the drug, and that's why this study is being launched to learn more about the drug while the submission process goes through. I also want to mention that because we want to also give AMX 35 to people worldwide, this global study will fulfill regulatory needs worldwide. The study design is somewhat similar to CENTAUR, but again, larger and longer. So about 600 people will be randomly assigned to active or placebo. And again, just like in CENTAUR, participants who complete the 48-week study will have the option to receive AMX 35 after the trial. So it's a similar framework where people are randomly assigned to active or placebo, but then at the end of the study, they can receive active drug long-term. These are the countries where the study will be enrolling. In terms of the US, site selection and activation are happening now, and the names of the sites will be posted online as they are activated. And I'm just providing here the link where you can find the names of the sites that will be part of this study. I do want to mention that they're not listed yet. They will be listed as they are activated. Activated means that they can actually enroll participants, at that time. So right now they're still working on study startup. In summary, CENTAUR was a positive trial that answered many scientific questions, and the data from CENTAUR are supporting a new drug application to the FDA. Phoenix, a phase 3 trial, was designed to supplement the AMX 35 clinical development program and is opening shortly in the US and Europe. So for more information on these programs and other ALS trials, I do want to recommend that you talk to your physician to see whether this trial or other programs might be suitable for you. There's also a number of resources online. There's lots of great groups, the ALS Association, as well as other groups listed on the slide that can provide information about what trials are open. They can give information about Phoenix, but also about other programs that are ongoing at this time for ALS, because obviously we want to, we hope that we will have as many clinical trials as possible to develop as many drugs as possible. So I do want to thank all the different groups that came together to really support this program, including the ALS Association, ALS Funding a Cure, and I Am ALS. It's really a community effort that made this happen. And I do want to acknowledge Dr. Mary Sukovic, whose picture is next to me on this slide. She's the chair of neurology at MGH and director of the Healy Center for ALS at Mass General, and really a critical figure in this drug development program. And I want to switch gears and talk about a different clinical trial that's still ongoing. We don't have results yet, but we should have them soon. And it's also a little bit of a different trial design, and I want to explain that. I want to explain why I think that's so exciting. I really think this is the right approach moving forward, and so that's why we were really excited to work in collaboration with so many groups that are listed on the slide to really bring the community together to take the next step for ALS. So the Healy ALS platform trial is led and sponsored by the Healy Center for ALS at Mass General in collaboration with a phenomenal group of investigators, researchers, industry partners, as well as a number of foundations and nonprofits, including the ALS Association and many others listed on the slide, that really came together to dramatically accelerate the way we do trials in ALS, because we know that time is of the essence. As Sandy told us, people with ALS are working on the ALS clock, not the regular time clock. And so once somebody is diagnosed, it's very important that there are as many trial options as possible available to that person, and also that as a community we make progress as quickly as possible so that we can really bring many new drugs on the market. So the good news is that there are a lot of drugs in development for ALS. So this was not true even 5 years ago, but over the last 5 years or so, because of the investment in scientific research and so many discoveries in genetics as well as other aspects of ALS, we now have over 160 companies in the ALS space. This is based on a tracker that we keep, and we know that we are working with thousands of investigators worldwide that have identified many targets. All of these people are part of the ALS community, the scientific community that's so dedicated to developing new drugs for ALS. Because we have so many drugs available in development, so we want to have a way to make our trials as efficient as possible. We cannot waste time testing drugs one at a time. And so traditionally, actually, that's what we've done. The traditional model is that we test one treatment at a time in a dedicated clinical trial. That's basically the equivalent of building a stadium every time you want to play a soccer game. So if you think about it, when you do a clinical trial, you're really building an entire infrastructure to test that one drug. You have one shot on goal. If it's positive, that's great. If it's negative, then you basically have to tear down the entire infrastructure and start again. And that's one of the reasons why drug development has been slow, because we kind of had to restart from scratch every time a new drug enters the clinical development program. We learned from our colleagues in cancer that there's a much more efficient way of testing drugs, and that's called the platform approach. And that's why we wanted to bring the platform approach to ALS for the first time. This is the Healy ALS platform trial. So in the platform approach, you can test many, many drugs at the same time. Essentially, the way this works is that you build an open infrastructure at the beginning of the trial, and you use and reuse the same infrastructure to test as many drugs as you want. So the concept here is that instead of always being in construction mode and testing one therapy at a time, having only one shot on goal every time, and then having to start from scratch, here we created this really huge infrastructure that can test as many drugs as we want. And that leads to efficiencies in terms of time and also infrastructure costs. And in general, it brings about so many scientific efficiencies that really we think this is the right approach for ALS at this time. And I want to explain what efficiencies this system can create. So it can cut the time it takes to develop new drugs in half. It can cut the costs by a third, and it can reduce placebo dramatically. And really, this was made possible by a donation from Mr. Healy, who is pictured in the slide here next to Dr. Sukovic, who is the sponsor of this trial. And really, because of his donation, we were able to jumpstart this trial last year and open it. We opened in the middle of the pandemic, as you may imagine, but because it's a very patient-centered trial, we are enrolling really at a great speed, and we have lots of options for telemedicine and other options to really make it feasible for people to participate. This was really a community collaboration. I do want to emphasize that we have been engaging with multiple stakeholders, including industry, the FDA, the patient community, foundations, sites, and investigators to really design a trial that will fit the needs of everyone involved. So this is a trial that industry wants to be part of. It's a trial that the FDA has vetted and so has agreed that this is a good design for ALS. We are really grateful for the support from the patient community. We have a very active patient advisory committee that's been providing fantastic input really from the time of trial design in terms of how to best design this trial. And we're working with a lot of sites. Right now it's about 50 sites of the NILS consortium, but we're adding more to bring the trial close to where people with ALS live. The trial design committee is listed on the slide. Again, I'm working closely with Dr. Sukovic, who is the sponsor of the trial, as well as with all the other colleagues you see on the slide. They are from different institutions. They're all amazing experts in ALS trial design and conduct. I do want to highlight that we have really a statistical dream team, including statisticians from MGH and from a company called Berry Consultants. They are experts in platform trials. So really we're marrying ALS expertise with platform trial expertise to really design the most efficient platform trial possible for ALS. So let me tell you more about how this works. So we use a shared infrastructure and a common protocol or master protocol to really gain those operational and scientific efficiencies that I briefly described earlier. Again, we want to have a trial that will reduce the time it takes to test the drugs. It will make it less expensive. And most importantly, from a patient perspective, we really want to minimize exposure to placebo. So I want to explain the flow of the trial from a participant perspective. So when somebody decides to enroll in the Healy ALS platform trial, because we're testing multiple drugs at the same time, each individual participant will be randomly assigned to one of the drugs that are being tested at that time. So when we opened the trial last year, in the summer of 2020, we opened with 3 drugs known as regimen A, B, and C here on the slide. And so every participant could be randomly assigned to either A or B or C. And then 6 months later, we also added a 4th drug, and I'll share the names later. But essentially, the concept is that when somebody enrolls, they are assigned randomly to one of the drugs that are being tested in the trial at that time. Then there is a second randomization, And within the regimen, a participant will be randomly assigned to either active or placebo. The placebo control period of the trial lasts 6 months. So this means that a participant will know which regimen they are assigned to. So for example, they'll know that they can potentially receive drug A. However, the participant will not know if they are on active or placebo for the placebo period of the trial. Now, the good news is that the chances of being on placebo are reduced with this design. Specifically, the randomization ratio is 3:1 active to placebo. What that means is that for every 4 people that enter the trial, only 1 goes on placebo and 3 will go on active. So it's a 3:1 randomization. And the reason this is possible is because the data from all the placebo participants are shared. So when a drug is compared to placebo, the drug is compared to placebo participants from that regimen, but also to the shared placebo from other regimens. And because we're sharing the data, we can reduce the chances of being assigned to placebo while maintaining the statistical power of the study. I also do want to mention, that's not on the slide, but after a participant completes the randomized period of the trial, which is 6 months, whoever completes the 6 months of randomized period, they will become eligible for receiving active drug long-term. So this means that essentially people will volunteer for this placebo-controlled trial, but then at the end of the trial, they're guaranteed access to active drug long-term until we know the results of the trial. Now, this works because the trial is governed by a master protocol. This is like our house. It's a common protocol that we use to test multiple drugs or multiple regimens. So the master protocol is our strong foundation. Really, we define the target population, what we're measuring, how we're going to do it, the randomization ratio, and that's common to all drugs. Then in our house, every drug or every regimen occupies a different floor. So then there are specific characteristics of each regimen that we need to know about. For example, the dosage, the route of administration, the safety profile, and if there are any additional assessments that are needed for that particular drug. And so by having that sort of overarching master protocol and then the flexibility at the level of each regimen, we can basically gain efficiencies while still allowing some individualized approach for each regimen. I do want to mention that because we have this common infrastructure and common protocol, we're also collecting a number of exploratory endpoints or biomarkers and things like DNA, neurofilament levels, other biomarkers. We also have 2 smartphone apps or digital outcomes. And this is very important to us because, as you may know from other presentations, it's very important to develop and understand biomarkers and ways to really be able to analyze the response of specific participants, understand the relationship with their DNA, and really try to find ways also to monitor participants in the home environment by using smartphone apps. So we are including all of these in the trial, and the reason we are including these additional assessments is, first of all, to test the efficacy of each drug, but also because we want to learn more about ALS itself. And this is important because we are going to share all of these learnings freely with the entire community and share data, share biosamples in the future so that we can all learn more from this trial. In other words, the impact of the trial and really the greatness of the trial is that we can learn more about the drugs that we're testing, but we're also learning more about ALS in general, which will help the field in general, and that's very important. So at this time, we are testing 4 drugs: zilucoplan, verdiperstat, CNM-Au8, and pridopidine. Again, there is a placebo-controlled period and then an open-label extension. I do want to mention that the trial is meant to be perpetual and adaptive. So what that means is that these are not the only 4 drugs that we're going to test. We plan on testing many, many drugs and do so rapidly. So at this time, we're actually already adding drug number 5. So we will continue to test more drugs so that there continues to be more spots for people to enroll in the trial. And also we want to test as many drugs as possible. These are the enrollment updates as of yesterday. We have over 800 people with ALS who have signed informed consent, and 239 have already completed the placebo-controlled period of the trial and have already started the open label extension. So they are on active drug. Now you can see the number at the breakdown by regimen or by drug. Right now we're testing 4, but again, we will add number 5 very soon. And we're almost at target in terms of enrollments for the first 3 regimens, and we're making amazing progress on regimen D as well. So this means that we will complete enrollment for the first 4 regimens, hopefully very soon, and we will definitely have a public announcement when that happens. But again, because we're adding more drugs, the trial is not closed. We will continue to stay open and test more drugs. This is how to find a center near you. Right now, we have 53 sites who are actively enrolling. And I want to mention that we selected 22 more sites. So these are coming soon. So the sites in blue on the map are already active. The sites in green are being added and they're listed on the right. Of note, the ones in green are not active yet. So we need to wait for them to be activated to really enroll, for example, in Idaho or Utah, the new states that are being added. Really, we want to continue to increase the number of sites because we want to make sure that people with ALS can find options near their home. As you can see, in New England, there's several options. If you have any questions about the trial, please contact our patient navigators, Catherine Small and Alison Bullat. Those are the phone numbers and emails address, and we have a few QR codes throughout the presentation, so please refer to them also to go to our website and get more information directly. So, sorry, just like we are doing right now with a webinar, we give webinars every week. So if you want to find the schedule and registration for our webinars, you can join us anytime. And the QR codes are there. And next week, we will have ALS as a guest speaker. Sorry, I spoke too much now. I do want to end and really share what's important, that we are really changing the pace of drug development, and we will continue to work with you. Sorry for the cough.
Hi. Oh, that was fabulous. Yeah, give you a chance to clear your throat there. So anybody that has questions for Dr. Paganoni, please put them in the Q&A or the chat session, because I've seen come to both. So give her a chance to settle. That was incredible. And thanks for giving us a little background on the naming of the trials as well, because that was a nice history. I don't know if you can be as creative for every future trial as you were for the first ones, but that was kind of nice. All right. So one of the questions that came through was about the Amylyx trial. Given that it's a combination of 2 different compounds, do the individual compounds themselves have efficacy in ALS patients? And can they be given to patients? Or is it really the combination that is the active function for this?
Question. Well, in our preclinical experiments, it was the combination that provided the most effect. Now, each drug individually may provide some effect, but really the reason we wanted to test the combination is because in the preclinical, in the lab experiments, it was the combination that was most effective.
Good. See, I've got David Doan had a question in the Q&A. Would the significant increase in survival alone with no adverse effects not be enough for the FDA to approve the Amylyx compound? Are statistics also analyzed and reviewed in smaller cohorts, such as onset, fast versus slow progression, et cetera?
Yeah, these are all great questions. So, the review by the FDA is complex. It's really not just about the trial results, but the application itself. I believe I was told applications like this can be about 100,000 pages long, because they're about the entire all the features of the product, everything from, the toxicology experiments or the lab studies, the animal experiments, and then the clinical trial, of course, but also other aspects such as chemistry and manufacturing and labeling. So again, obviously, we all hope that that's going to be enough for the agency to approve it. We won't know until the review process is completed. And so the second question.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So the
subgroups. Yeah. So right now, in the CENTAUR trial, it was a group of 137 individuals. So it was a good size trial, but it was also relatively modest. And so I think that we saw results kind of, on the entire population. We don't have any specific subgroups of responders. The population was rather homogeneous. So I think that's one of the reasons, that the Phoenix trial is going to provide additional information, because it's going to be a broader population. It's going to be a much larger population, about 600 people, and perhaps that could provide additional information about subgroups if we see trends in specific subgroups. That's one of the reasons why that study is important.
Oh, that's great. So I had a question about the platform trial. Given that there's so many different drugs, and depending on which one you end up in, they can be very different in their dosing strategies, their delivery mechanisms. And are patients guided to a tour to one or the others given their proximity to the location? Because if you have to go in for infusions at a regular basis, or can they be given at satellite locations?
Right. So, the 4 drugs that are in the trial right now, they are one is subcutaneous injection, so it's a small injection like diabetics would do for insulin if they need that, and the other 3 drugs are oral, meaning that one is a drink and 2 are pills. Now, the next drug, number 5, is an intravenous infusion, but we also have methods for home delivery. So hopefully, other than the first few infusions, it should be doable for also for people who don't live nearby centers. So I would say 2 things. Number 1, we're increasing the number of centers. That's one of the reasons, right, to bring it closer to where people live. However, obviously, we cannot be in every town. So what we're doing for the infusion drug is that there's going to be options for home infusion as well.
Because that expands the number of patients.
Right.
Mobility obviously is a huge issue, and travel to these clinical sites. So that's wonderful. Of the patients enrolled, so another question, Jean Fay, of the patients enrolled in the platform trial, how many, if any, have withdrawn from the study due to side effects?
Yeah, I don't have the exact numbers here. I would say the vast majority continued. We will analyze and report all the data in mid-2022, and that's going to be, a full report, including all the safety information. So, it's hard to tell until we really have that's the way trials work. We cannot report or analyze the full data until the end. Now, I do want to say that we do have an independent DSMB, which DSMB stands for Data Safety and Management Board. It's an independent body that reviews the data on a regular basis. So should there be any safety signals, any concerns for the safety, they have the authority to stop the trial, and this has not happened. So again, these trials do have some sort of, while we don't know the results until the end, there are safety mechanisms that are part of the trial design itself. That's true for this trial and all the major trials. So essentially, there is an independent group of people that looks at the results in real time. So if there are any safety concerns, or we also do interim analysis. So if, for example, the drug is definitely not working, they can stop the trial. So again, there's a number of other mechanisms and things that happen behind the scenes so that should there be any concerns, the trial would be stopped. But again, that has not happened.
That's great. So one of the questions I had, given that you have so many trial sites now coming online and more in the future, is the nature of the ALS population, and is that going to be shifting over time, hopefully including more diverse patient populations that may not have traditionally been included in these kinds of trials?
Absolutely, that's the goal. The goal is to be able to offer the trial to everyone. Now, obviously, people can choose to enroll or not, but the goal is to change the framework, change the situation where, before, like, thinking about 10 years ago, or even like, more recently, before this trial started, unfortunately, there were very limited spots for these trials, and it was only a few locations. It was in, again, a small number of slots, and so it wasn't as accessible and it wasn't as inclusive, just because that there was really a limitation in the offer. Here we really want to change that. We really want to give as many options as possible to as many people as possible. Obviously, people can choose to enroll or not, but we want at least have everyone or most people to have the opportunity to enroll.
So how have your experience has been so far in recruiting patients? It looks like you're filling numbers pretty quickly.
Yeah, the enrollment rates have been amazing, and really, I think this is also because we really learned a lot from our patient advisors, and also developed a number of processes in the trial that are patient-centered. So a lot of things like, for example, the weekly webinars or certain aspects of trial design that were really suggested by the patient population, because we really wanted to launch a trial that patients would want to be part of, not something that people don't want to be part of. So I think that's the great enrollment numbers despite the pandemic. I really a testament to that. I think if even in non-pandemic times, the enrollment numbers would be considered great. I think that to see these numbers, given the situation and the fact that many sites have been closed for months or couldn't accept more than a certain number of people because of institutional restrictions, I mean, that makes it even more remarkable.
Right. So the inclusion criteria for the platform, is that a common set of inclusion criteria?
Yes, exactly. So there is a common protocol and a common set of inclusion criteria. Now, to be complete in my response, there's also a few additional inclusion exclusion criteria at the regimen level, only if needed for safety. So, for example, certain drugs cannot be combined with other drugs because of drug-drug interaction. So we try to limit that. That's the only thing that could be added. But by and large, the criteria are the same for all regimens.
Okay. And so I don't remember what those criteria were roughly.
So roughly, people need to be diagnosed with ALS. Obviously, we take people both with sporadic or familial. So these treatments are not targeted to any specific type of ALS, whether it's familial or sporadic or bulbar or limb onset. Again, they're applicable to everyone. And in terms of time since onset, that's within the previous 3 years. In terms of respiratory function, the cutoff is 50% of predicted, and people need to be able to swallow. So those are the main criteria for this trial. I do want to mention that we recognize that not everyone can be included because people will be excluded based on those criteria. And so we are also working, I didn't really focus on that during the presentation, but we are also working on launching as many expanded access options as possible for people who are not enrolled in the trial. And actually, we'll speak about that at the next weekly webinar next week. But essentially, we already have 8 sites who are already, sort of part of that. And we continue to fundraise and to open more spots. These are small programs right now, but the intent is to open more.
Good. Given that the duration of the trials is not excessively long, the after, when then perhaps they can be expanded and provide additional access. So that's great. So if you don't meet the criteria initially, there may be later access if things are positive.
Yeah, hopefully, yeah.
Oh, that sounds great. Any big surprises in this platform design? Because, like you said, there was a history in cancer research, but have there been any interesting surprises of this kind of a platform trial for a neurodegenerative disease?
That's an interesting question. Well, we knew that this could be a successful framework from cancer because, I mean, again, it's been successful there. And this was the first time this was tried in ALS. I would say that it's not a surprise, but I mean, a pleasant surprise. I mean, a confirmation of the validity of the approach is that despite the pandemic and despite the fact that, again, many centers were closed and just couldn't open at certain times, there's been really huge enthusiasm from everyone, industry, the FDA, the patient population, the investigators, the clinicians, the people who enroll the participants. So I think this really resonates because everyone wants to understands that it's important to make progress as fast as possible and to really be efficient in the way we test drugs. So hopefully we will continue to grow. Again, we are expanding to new sites, we are adding new drugs. The idea is to keep this open, as long as it needs to be open so that we can continue to develop more drugs.
Right. I guess one of the last things I was thinking about, given that you're getting the success of these sites and new sites coming on, will we be able to keep that pipeline filled? Obviously, it took time to get to this place. You said we didn't have the drug companies with drugs ready to go. Do you think that we have enough in the pipeline to keep feeding this trial platform over the next several years?
I think so. I mean, obviously, the hope is that we will, as we do that, we will actually discover many new drugs. And so hopefully at some point the trial will become, not needed anymore because we have drugs that are super effective. But in the meantime, absolutely, I think we do have drugs to test. And so we need to continue to do so.
All right. I don't see any more questions in the Q&A, but I want to thank the audience and thank Dr. Paganoni for a fabulous seminar, and we're going to have to keep having you come back.
Thank you. This will be great.
So thank you so much.
Thank you, and thanks everyone for listening.
All right. I think we will be ready to head back to our next. We're just on time, like 30 seconds. Did a great job filling all your time, and the responses from the audience was wonderful. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we will move on to our next event.
Thank you.